This episode is brought to you by Chainalysis, the leading blockchain data platform that powers investigation, compliance, and risk management tools used by both businesses and government agencies around the globe. You'll hear more about Chainalysis later in the show.
Welcome back, everyone. We have two recurring and very special guests again, Jake and Rebecca. Welcome back. It's been a while since we did a regulatory catch-up, so it's great to have you both on. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us. It feels like many years have been in between each episode.
I know, we're like now in a bull market, it seems. The sentiment's totally different, but there's a lot going on the regulatory side. I know you both. Jake, first of all, congratulations. You have a new role now, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and then we can transition into all things regulatory.
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much. So I recently announced I'm going to be joining Variant as Chief Legal Officer. For those who don't know, Variant is an early stage venture capital firm focused on the ownership economy and investing in the future of Web3. And I have actually been advising them for the last 2.5 years, working with Jesse Walden and Lee Jin, the general partners. I'm just an unbelievably huge fan of them and the thesis. And I'm very excited to get back to practicing law and helping founders figure out how to navigate some of these regulatory and policy and legal issues that we talk about on this podcast. I am also not going very far from the policy world, so looking forward to continuing doing this with you and Jason and Rebecca for as long as it matters.
That's great. I think it ties into a lot of your effort, Rebecca, at Polygon, which is really showcasing the use cases. And Variant as a fund, really, you guys invest in a lot of consumer. And I think that's so important to really showcasing to regulators and general public of why crypto is so useful. I think as a starting point, obviously there's the war that has recently broken up, and unfortunately in Israel and Palestine. And this Senator Warren has come out just really saying, crypto is bad. Hamas, it's being used. Cryptocurrencies are being used to finance terrorism, and that I think is really negative. And we see this time and time again. So maybe Rebecca or Jake, whoever wants to start, kick us off there, and then what's going on in DC.
Yeah. So I'll kick us off. I think the anti-money laundering question when it comes to both crypto and then extending it out, particularly to DeFi, is one of the existential questions that the industry needs to band together on and come up with some really good answers to. And they're hard, and the answers may be imperfect, right? I know many of us want to preserve the systems as they are today or as they're intended to be, especially on the DeFi side of things. And we should keep things permissionless at all costs. But I think there needs to be an answer and a response. Now, what I do think is a lot of the talk of crypto being used for illicit finance has been really made into sensationalized headlines. There is still plenty of illicit finance that goes through fiat. Even the DeFi Treasury report talked about that many months ago. So I think that needs to be put in context. But there's the framework of the Bank Secrecy Act, what everyone calls the BSA, that sets out this idea of this like detection and deterrence regime for money laundering for financial institutions, at least in the United States. And then the Financial Action Task Force is this like global anti-money laundering group that does try to come up with ideas for how to combat these issues. And they have a virtual asset something VACG, so their virtual currency working group that has been trying to work on both CeFi and DeFi issues for money laundering for a long time. On the CeFi side of things, we, I think in the US, all of the major exchanges and other centralized actors are licensed for the most part in some way. And so as a money services business, or a virtual currency exchanger, you do have these types of AML KYC obligations. But if you actually look at what FATF is saying, global compliance on the CeFi side is, I think, 20% or below. And we know from having been able to, through the transparency of the blockchain, track how a lot of this terrorist financing, illicit activity through crypto works, is they go to offshore exchanges, right? Because nobody's taking your favorite, I don't even know what the non-swearing word is to call it, but like these low liquidity coins. Somebody needs to come up with a better word.
Shit coins, but yes.
Okay. You can say it, I won't.
Sure.
But and I was on like a TradFi type panel this morning, and I was like, what word do I use? But yes, those
highly speculative internet coins.
Sure. Those are usually are the ones probably most sort of least secure and frequently what get hacked. And then they're turned into stable coins. And then to get them into fiat, right? Because no one's taking their shitcoins and actually like, using them to finance weapons of mass destruction or something like that. They're taking them either out to stablecoins or really much more so to fiat. And they're doing that through these offshore exchanges. So there really needs to be work there. And I know FATF is trying to figure out how to bring these non-compliant exchanges up to snuff, but they're also, look, you have to obviously have you also have to have the evidence to back this up. But lots of times, OFAC, or the Office of Foreign Asset Control, will put sanctions out on centralized actors in other countries that they know are facilitating money laundering in ways that it affects the United States. And so I'm curious as to whether we will see some of those types of actions when it comes to CeFi. DeFi is much more complex. And maybe I'll put a pause on that because I do think we just saw this notice of proposed rulemaking come out of FinCEN last week about mixers. And I think that's sort of meant to address this question of terrorist financing because I talk a lot about overseas actors using crypto for illicit activity. But Jake, I don't want to I could keep talking about this for a long time, but I'll stop.
Yeah, well, I mean, as always, I totally agree with all of that. And I think it will be good for us to get into some of the details of the specific regulatory proposals that we're seeing and also legislative proposals that we're seeing to try to address this issue. But maybe just to give a bit more of the high level perspective. I think, first of all, we have to start from a position of acknowledging that nobody wants bad guys like terrorists or money launderers to abuse this technology, right? That is not why we are here. We are not building technology because we want to make it easier for terrorists to carry out attacks on innocent civilians. That said, we are building technology, and technology is a tool that can be used for good or for ill. And it's not surprising that just like every other technology that has reached escape velocity like crypto has, like the internet or anything else, we are seeing it abused by bad actors. And so the challenge for us is to engage with that reality and figure out how do we maximize the benefits of this technology while mitigating the risks and reducing the downside. And that's the conversation that we're having right now. Now, for a very long time, the way that the industry has addressed this challenge has been to say, we already have regulation on the on-ramps and the off-ramps into the crypto ecosystem, right? We already have the full application of the Bank Secrecy Act. We have surveillance, we have monitoring, we have reporting, and we have the ability to freeze and seize assets on exchanges where people are getting money into the system and taking money out of the system. And within the crypto ecosystem itself, there's not a lot of conversion of digital assets into useful goods and services for bad guys, right? Exactly like we're saying, they don't really use shitcoins to buy machine parts to power rockets or weapons of mass destruction or things of that nature. The problem is, especially with the increase in use of stable coins, we are starting to see that shift. And also, as we are seeing more use of crypto, as a percentage of total volume, a vanishingly small amount, but still just more use of crypto for illicit activity globally, we're starting to get tougher questions about how are we going to address this problem, not just at the on and off ramps, but also within the crypto ecosystem itself. And there's sort of two ways, broadly speaking, to address that challenge. One way, and the way that we are trying, I think Rebecca and I are spending a lot of time trying to address this, is to say, there are better ways to address illicit financial activity than simply excluding the vast majority of human beings from the financial system. And that is what we do right now. We keep, 7 billion people or so out of the financial system simply because they do not have an appropriate government issued ID that allows them to pass a KYC check to get access to basic financial services, which I view as a human right, something that everyone should be entitled to. And instead, we should use crypto native mechanisms to try to root out illicit activity while still expanding access to financial services for all people. That's one way of looking at this. The other way, and unfortunately the one we're seeing more, and we'll get into how exactly we are seeing this being implemented, is to simply expand the dragnet that we already have in the traditional financial system, which says the financial system must be dominated by intermediaries, and the intermediaries will be deputized to perform essentially a law enforcement function of surveilling what types of transactions people are conducting and then stopping people from getting access to the system. There's an inherent mismatch between decentralized technology and that type of centralized regulatory solution, but that's the battle that we're fighting right now.
We've seen this coming from a lot of international regulators too, which is they they want to find, and this is a defined term through IOSCO, which is this International Organization of Securities Regulators, a responsible person, because that is what we are used to seeing in most financial and economic activity. And they want somebody to be responsible. And so if we are going to get into some of these legislative proposals, I think we'll talk about this, but they're all seeking to figure out who's the responsible person here. And they're all pitting it on different actors in the space, some of whom may make more sense than pitting it on than others. But ultimately, it's probably not even the best result, I'd say. So I think this is, but I think one, as Jake said, like nobody wants bad actors to use crypto for bad purposes, and the industry needs to be pretty vocal about that being a fact. I think because there is this idea that it's permissionless and ungovernable, and in many ways that's partly why I think Jake, or certainly I'll speak for myself, but I do think why Jake and I are here, that this does upend many of the concepts that have held back access to people throughout the world. That's really, really obviously important. But people are just trying to impose sort of this old system on this new system and trying to keep it as permissionless as possible. So you have the benefits is really important too. But we need to be, I think, speaking with one voice to say, like, we don't want this. And we're going to work and collaborate to find a solution that keeps the benefits and the beauty of the technology intact as well.
I mean, I'll go as far as saying even the bad guys don't want to get crypto. I mean, Hamas issued a kind of a statement even before the war started. Like, I think it was a year ago. It said, "Guys, please don't send any more Bitcoin because you're putting a target on your back. Like, you're all of a sudden becoming a very identifiable person." And so it's just important to understand that, right? I mean, go talk to the folks at Silk Road. Like, the reason why we're able to trace this down is because it's transparent in nature. So it's important to just kind of understand that. But I agree with this. So is this sentiment properly understood in political circles? How much of it is just because we've seen time and time again, certain figureheads want to get ahead in terms of get political goodwill and make all this noise, but maybe the working groups within these agencies kind of really understand and have a more balanced pro crypto opinion?
Mm.
I'm kind of curious, like, because this is very sensitive. Right? When you start talking about terrorism, you start talking about axis of evil, and crypto gets involved in that. Like, people really are very binary. Have we made any progress?
We've definitely made some progress. I'm curious what Rebecca's take is, because I know she's been working
I'm
on
looking
this
at
a
her.
lot.
No, I'm so interested to hear what Jake has to say, because I actually think we made progress in a way that people can't see. So this is a good question, so we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe there's sort of 4 categories of responses that we get from policymakers when we talk about this. So I'll go sort of from best to worst from our perspective. The best one, and I think that we are hearing this increasingly as we educate people in DC, is an understanding of our perspective, which is there are better ways. There's a win-win here, right? There is a way to both increase access to financial services and mitigate risk by removing intermediaries from the financial system, while also addressing illicit financial activity in a really effective way. And that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Instead, we should support innovation, and we should let this technology grow into a place where we have this sort of win-win of the best of all worlds. That's one perspective, and the best one. And I will say we hear this not just from Republicans. A lot of people think crypto is this partisan issue, Republicans in favor, Democrats against. That is not the case, right? We are hearing this on both sides of the aisle. The second category, I would say, are the folks who just don't understand yet what's going on here, right? So they think the entire crypto industry is simply non-compliant. They are used to a financial system that necessarily requires some middleman in order for people to transact at a distance. And when we say this is new, this is decentralized, this is disintermediated, you can't find a responsible person in the way that you might think, this is peer-to-peer, they just don't really get that yet because they haven't understood it. And often, and this is something Rebecca is better at than I think anyone doing this kind of work, is to literally explain what the technology does and then show them, right, to pull up a decentralized exchange front end and connect a Web3 wallet to it and do a transaction and say there was no intermediary in that transaction. That blows people's minds, and it's really fun to have those moments. The third category are the people who don't care. And I would put, unfortunately, Senator Warren in this category. I think she genuinely does not care about the trade-offs of what's good or what's bad here. I think that she's looking to score political points, all due respect. And she's doing that effectively. And I think it is quite sad that a lot of our politics in the United States is dominated not by making good policy decisions, but by saying something that will get headlines and will get votes, and then we'll get donations for campaign funding. And I think that there's a sort of growing and large category of people, at least since FTX exploded, who feel like attacking crypto is just an advantageous thing to do, and they will take advantage of any crisis in the world, including a terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel, to accrue their own political power. This is sort of the third category. The fourth category, and this is maybe the one that we need to be most concerned about, are the people who do understand. They know what decentralization is. They just do not like it. They think it is a worse financial system. They believe that intermediaries are necessary in order for us to address illicit financial activity and any other type of concern that they have about how the financial system works. And they do not care about all of those billions of people who don't have access. This is often a very Americentric view, right? A view that you have when you are in a privileged, developed nation that has a well-functioning financial system, and you have the luxury of just not caring about anybody else. But those are some of the folks who are putting forward some of the regulatory proposals that we might talk about. It's not that they don't get it. It's not that they, are just trying to score political points. They get it. They just don't agree with us.
Yeah, I mean, so Richie Torres has said a number of times that this isn't a partisan issue. This is a generational issue. And frequently you can see it breaking down that way from the policymaker side. And so when we talk about whether we've made progress, and I will put this across definitely, I'll put it across all branches of government in the United States, that when you hit the staff level, usually who's a bit younger, maybe a bit more in the weeds. And I'd say this is true at agencies that we think and have very public anti-crypto stances in the United States too. The staff of many of the regulatory agencies and the staffers on the Hill, and I'd venture to say the clerks who are supporting a number of the judges who've put out really interesting, really tech forward, what we think of as spot on legal decisions, all do seem to get it on some level. They can't be making the progress that we'd all like to see, right? But what I keep saying and keep telling myself is that we're sort of living through the worst part of the storm. And so whereas like you look at your face and you don't see it aging every day because you're looking at yourself in the mirror on Zoom or whatever. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, wow, I look so much older. It's, or you see, or somebody else, right? You haven't seen them for a long time. And then you see them, you think, oh, they look much older. I think 5 years from now, things will look different, maybe 10, things will look really different, but we can't see the incremental change. One, because I do think that there is a lot of very loud leadership in all levels of government who may generationally not be aligned with us, as Jake is saying. And then also, at the same time, once there's an opportunity, and I spoke to somebody yesterday who's at a regulatory agency who was saying, like, we're just waiting for a break in leadership to be able to try to make some progress because people at the staff level are working on it. So I do think there is the possibility for change. I do think we're in a better place than we used to be. I think it's very hard to see right now for a number of different reasons.
Chainalysis is the premier blockchain data platform. Crypto businesses, financial institutions, government agencies, regulators, and policymakers all utilize Chainalysis's data and services to make sense of what's happening on the blockchain. Chainalysis demystifies crypto by providing industry-leading compliance, market intelligence, and investigation support for all crypto assets for organizations like Square and Barclays and BNY Mellon. As regulators and policymakers work together to pass legislation that provides clarity for crypto businesses and protects consumers, they have the chance to do so with unparalleled data and research into the entire crypto ecosystem. Gain greater visibility and insight with the leading blockchain data platform by visiting chainalysis.com/empire. If you are looking into compliance and you need blockchain compliance, there is no better place. It is chainalysis.com/empire.
I want to transition over to now this mixer rule that was introduced recently. And all of this, I want your perspective in terms of, I think when people see these news, of course, it gets blasted all over. How much of that is just like, in what stage are these kind of bills? Like, because I think a lot of people see them, they're like, oh my God, this could be implemented and be live and tomorrow. And if I don't comply, it's, but of course, that's not the case, I think. And so maybe if you could just give some context on the bill and then kind of talk about kind of what the different scenarios and possibilities are for it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back it up a little bit. So the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is overseen by the Department of the Treasury, put out a proposal of special measure regarding what they call convertible virtual currencies. And first of all, it's not a bill. It is rules which are put out by a regulatory agency, right? The Treasury is under the admin side of things. So they wouldn't necessarily put out a bill. So that's one. They are looking for feedback. So people should read it and actually provide feedback. And they ask really specific, detailed questions about certain things. So we can get into the substance in a second. And the notice of the proposed rulemaking comments have to be submitted by a certain date. And then what happens after that is not like somebody turns around tomorrow, you put your comments out, and a day later things come out. It's that they will take in all the comments. They will have to read them under the Administrative Procedures Act. They'll have to take them into account. They have certain balancing factors, right? Benefits versus risks. And we should talk about one thing everybody really needs to do because there's a very specific request in here. And I think people really, we should be working as an industry to come forward to meet that request. But to make the responses, to understand what they say, to do all the balancing they're required to do under the Administrative Procedures Act, and then they will put out a potential rule. So that's the first thing. So it's not a bill. It doesn't need to get passed. It's just a notice of proposed rulemaking. What it actually does, Jake, is there anything you want to add on the procedure side of things?
No, nailed it.
Okay. What this notice of proposed rulemaking does substantively is that it asks for domestic financial institutions and domestic financial agencies, so domestic meaning based in the US, to implement record keeping and reporting requirements, which are things that FIs already have to do under the Bank Secrecy Act, relating to transactions involving mixing, basically, for crypto. And on its face, I think that's not crazy, right? One, you have to be a financial institution, right? It's not saying we're going to regulate DeFi on its own or something like that. They're saying you're already a regulated entity. We'd like you to do additional enhanced reporting and record keeping, which is what the BSA requires. So that's the first part of it. The real and record keeping and reporting are part of their normal course. The real problem is the breadth of what mixing is under this proposed rule would capture, I'd say, all smart contract based applications, definitely DeFi apps, but probably even ones that expand out from DeFi that just somehow, you're still using crypto and other types of smart contract based applications. That's really problematic. And one of the things that I was sort of shocked seeing is that they said, well, instead of actually taking on these additional reporting and record keeping requirements, we understand that financial institutions probably may just decide not to touch mixers at all. And so fine if your only mixer is Tornado Cash and it's already been sanctioned. Let's put aside what you think about that. I have many strong feelings, and I don't even think we did it. Maybe we did like a portion of an episode on it. But now the thing is, oh no. And by the way, Coinbase is an FI because they're a money services business. So they already have a lot of these requirements. It would say they wouldn't touch any of DeFi. So that's really, really problematic. And the portion of the industry that this really benefits, and when you're reading the proposed rulemaking, I mean, it's just screaming out to you like, this benefits the blockchain analytics companies.
How much of this is just chain out? Like, okay, let's intermission. How much damage has Chainalysis, chain analysis, and what's the other one? Like CipherTrace have done for the industry? Because I mean, I've heard some crazy stories of they're just really doing fear mongering and pushing stuff that is really just going to stimulate their business. I mean, they're raised around and they got to support it, which, anyways, feel free to comment or not comment, but continue if not.
not commenting, but on page 55 of the notice and proposed rulemaking, like you're reading the whole thing and you're like, all this is going to do is have the analytics companies be more involved, because what it on the record keeping, what you'd and these requirements, you'd really have to do on-chain monitoring really deeply for all of your customers, like for every transaction, to know if it touched a mixer and they were bringing it back into the exchange. But the funny part was, on page, I kept thinking this the whole time I was reading it, on page 55, it says, in particular, FinCEN expects the proposed requirements may affect the demand for services by third-party blockchain analytics companies. And I was just like, well, at least we're calling
That
it
reads
like
like an IPO prospectus. That's
so
lovely.
I just thought that was very interesting that they at least were. Look, FinCEN has historically been, I'd say, one of the most aware regulators on crypto for many, many years. I think people thought the 2019 FinCEN guidance was some of the best in the space, and probably stays, pretty good and pretty out there in front to today. So they understood a lot of what they were writing here, and they asked really good questions. But I've been talking for a long time now, so Jake, all you.
I mean, again, as always, excellent explanation of the details. Let me, as I often do, step us back just a little bit and then zoom in on a different piece of this. So stepping back, what is actually going on here? To me, this is, again, part and parcel of this macro challenge that we have, which is regulators want to identify the parties who are transacting, right? They want full insight and surveillance over the financial system. And this particular area within crypto, mixers, are a tool that people can use to get privacy so that the government cannot surveil their transactions. And what we are seeing is sort of a full frontal assault from regulators, specifically anti-money laundering regulators, to try to figure out who are the people who are transacting and how do we circumvent this type of technology. Now, they know that they cannot stop software developers from building these tools. They can't stop them from being launched onto blockchains. They can't stop people from using them once they're already in the crypto ecosystem. So then the question is, how do they stop people from using them to make them as low liquidity and as difficult for people to use to protect their privacy as possible? One answer is sanctions. And that's what we saw with Tornado Cash, where the government said Tornado Cash is simply illegal for US persons to use. And that is sort of the strongest form of an attack that we can imagine, where the government simply criminalizes a particular type of technology. That's why that designation is subject to litigation right now in 2 different lawsuits that Rebecca and I, through the DeFi Education Fund, are both involved in, because we oppose OFAC's designation of Tornado Cash as a sanctioned party, whatever that means. This action is sort of like sanctions light, the designation of a class of transactions as a primary money laundering concern. And it's very noteworthy because the Patriot Act has been in effect for over 20 years. The Treasury Department has had this ability to designate primary money laundering concerns for that long. They can designate an institution, a jurisdiction, a type of account, or a class of transactions. They have never designated a class of transactions before. So this is a novel action that the Treasury Department is taking, one step further going after crypto than they've ever done in any other type of context. And I say it's sanctions light because, as Rebecca was just explaining quite well, the designation doesn't say it is illegal to use a mixer. What it says is, hey, you regulated financial institutions, do you really want to touch these things? Because if you don't paint within the lines, you might get in trouble with us. And that is really a signal to them to simply cut these things out. And that's often how the government works. They don't tell you exactly what to do, but they sort of hint, are you really sure you want to take on that risk? Understanding that an in-house compliance department is going to say, it's better for us to just de-risk this entirely and not have to suffer the consequences of getting it wrong and the high compliance costs of going forward with it. So I think that's sort of where we are now. Drilling into 2 pieces of this that I think are worth talking about.
Drill, they literally say it in the NPR. They said it is reasonable to expect that the relative attractiveness of engaging with CVC mixers or the number of those who avail themselves of CVC mixing services might be affected. They totally call it like they see it. Sorry, keep going.
Exactly right. And I think just as Rebecca was doing, it is very important with rulemaking like this to read very carefully what they are saying. Now, the way they are framing this is, we think that mixers are a particularly high risk because bad guys are using them to launder funds. But if you read the definition that they provide for CVC mixing, it is way more broad than something like Tornado Cash or another privacy preserving protocol. It includes basically anything in DeFi. It, as an example, gives something that pools user funds, period, end of conversation. So what this really looks like is not just Treasury saying we're uncomfortable with privacy tools, it's them saying we're uncomfortable with DeFi.
But
And
they
that is
are.
very,
But
because they are very consistent with what they've been saying for many, many months. They put out a
Yeah.
risk assessment of DeFi in, I want to say it was in March or April or February earlier this year. And their take on DeFi basically was like, we don't think decentralization is a thing, but if it is a thing, we don't like it and we want it to stop. So that's sort of what the message is that's coming here. Now, let me give you just one more piece of this from the politics perspective, because there's an interesting conversation happening in DC around this right now, which is this actually good for us? Because if we get to talk about the legislation, the bills that Elizabeth Warren and Senator Warner and others are putting forward, those things just ban crypto outright. And there's at least an argument to make that says, this is the Treasury Department kind of trying to help us. They're basically saying, look, we don't need new legislation. You don't have to ban all of crypto. We already have the tools that we need to address these problems. And there's an argument to be made. This is a little bit more behind the scenes than I probably should be saying on a public podcast. But like, there's an argument that really our public messaging should be like, we support this rulemaking. The Treasury Department has all the tools that it needs to address illicit finance. We do not need Congress to do anything, because that might be better than the alternative, which is Elizabeth Warren right now saying Treasury does not have the tools they need. We need to pass my bill because my bill is the only way that we're going to solve this problem.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. Where do you go from here? So, like, there's a comment thing, like, people can read it, they can comment. I'm sure you guys are going to be commenting and doing a lot. Rebecca?
So here's what they are begging for. And this, the industry needs to come together and do. I have to find the actual wording. They say we have to do what I said before. Under the APA, they do have these different types of balancing exercises that they need to do, some of which is like what we'd call a traditional cost benefit analysis. And they literally are asking for examples of legitimate business purposes for mixing. They specifically ask for it. They need it to balance against what harm they would be doing by implementing this rule against the legitimate business purposes for mixers. So honestly, I would love for somebody to do work collecting those for the purposes of putting them all into a response. If it's not BA or the DeFi Education Fund, I personally will do it and figure out a way to get them, into somebody's response. But like, we really need the industry to come together and give anecdotes, and it's probably fine if it's anonymous too, about legitimate business purposes for mixers. And we heard a lot about them after the Tornado Cash designation, a sanctions designation, where people said like, well, I pay all my employees in crypto and people don't want to have like the amounts of money they're getting paid traced. And like, it's like Jake was talking about, like, we're allowed to have, privacy, particularly over our financial transactions. We have a lot of that today in certain aspects, although the BSA does allow for centralized intermediary surveillance on some level. But I do think we need to talk very publicly and also then submit to FinCEN all the legitimate ways that mixers are important to preserving privacy, right? Like what Vitalik tweeted out too, like, I don't want everyone tracking my wallets when I donate to Ukraine and things like that.
Right. I mean, I guess, like, would you start by like redefining or narrowing the scope of a mixer? I mean, like, that to me feels like it's just like everything under the sun. Like, you're swapping from an L2 to an L1. Okay, that's some sort of that. I mean, in my understanding was, correct me here if I'm wrong, but the definition is just so broad. I think intentionally so.
Yeah. Should we go through it? I have to find it.
Yeah, I'd love to just dissect it, because to me it feels like if you, I wouldn't even want to start giving examples. I would rather just try to get it like focusing on narrowing down the definition.
Oh, sure. So I think you probably need to, if you're going to respond, you need to do it in two steps.
Yeah.
You need to say, what are you talking about when you're talking about a mixer? So I'm talking about a mixer the way we would all talk about mixers,
Right.
right?
Yeah, like Tornado Cash, like, like
Sure.
a tumbler. Yeah.
And then you need to say, what are the legitimate uses for that? Because if we're going to go with legitimate uses for DeFi, people should get tomes. Okay, the term CVC mixing means the facilitation of CVC transactions or crypto transactions in a manner that obfuscates the source, destination, or amount involved in one or more transactions, regardless of the type of protocol or service used, such as pooling or aggregating CVC from multiple persons' wallets, addresses, or accounts.
So like liquidity pools?
DeFi. 2, using programmatic or algorithmic code to coordinate, manage, or manipulate the structure of a transaction, also DeFi. Right, splitting CVC for and like when I was reading it, I wrote like DeFi, like on each of them.
That second one is not just DeFi. That's just like any
Thanks.
smart contract.
It's not just, well, so first of all, not even just smart contracts. Like it's like probably like robo advisors and like anything.
Like high frequency trade. Yeah.
Yeah, if you programmatic or algorithmic code to coordinate, manage, or manipulate the structure of a transaction, like that's almost all of fintech today on some level, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So it's quite broad, except it does have the modifier. Well, in theory, it does have the modifier that it has to be crypto, but still, splitting CVC for transmittal or transmitting the CVC through a series of independent transactions, also DeFi, creating and using single-use wallets, addresses, or accounts, and sending CVC through such wallets, addresses, or accounts, exchanging between types of CVC or other digital assets. That's also DeFi. That's just exchanging, or facilitating user-initiated delays in transactional activity. Now, quite frankly,
intense.
What?
Is that like that to me felt like intense?
It's very intense. But I do think like the other thing that's so strange about this is like a user-initiated delay in DeFi sometimes is a really good thing. Right? Like I think there are also like benefits to many of the things that they're including in here that really do get lost. And so doing the benefits analysis is extremely important.
How would you modify this definition, Jake? Or I guess if you, assuming you have to work within the boundaries here.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. And that's, we're still figuring out for the Blockchain Association. I think we all are figuring out what is the response to this. And I think there's in the short term, sort of two ways to respond to this. One is to just say, this is wrong, don't do this. And I'm sort of inclined to start there because what I don't want to do is allow the government to take advantage of this sort of crisis moment to take away civil liberties. And often that's what we see, right? That's sort of how we got the Patriot Act in the first place. And so I don't really want to say this horrible thing happened, therefore we'll give up on privacy. I still believe very strongly in privacy. I don't think that it is right to designate a class of transactions, the class being ways that people can maintain their own privacy and dignity over their financial transactions, to designate that as a primary money laundering concern, right? Not all private transactions are criminal. So I sort of like hesitate to say, let's work with them to figure out what a better definition is. But I think if there is going to be a better definition, it needs to be narrowly tailored, and it actually needs to be something specifically related to obfuscating the source of funds for the purpose of hiding or making use of ill-gotten gains or something of that nature.
Or like the sole purpose of the front end protocol is to allow for obfuscation of transactions without the ability to unshield a transaction. That's it. Because even there are some mixers where you can, if requested, if you send money from Tornado to Coinbase, I think Coinbase would say, hey, wait a minute, where's this coming from? And Tornado would issue you a proof where you can trace it all the way back. You can generate these proofs. I don't understand what the problem is. If there's a mixer that doesn't allow that, then that's the problem. That's
you mean
literally the only problem.
Before the designation, Coinbase won't touch Tornado.
No, not anymore.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is Tornado would generate this proof.
Yeah.
Right. To whoever party needs to know. It's like when your bank comes and says, "Show me, source of wealth." Oh yeah.
Like the privacy pools paper and that came out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And look, I don't know that I have an opinion about the privacy polls paper specifically, but I think this gets exactly to the point that we always make, which is there are better ways to do anti-money laundering without doing know your customer, right? There are ways we can use this technology to improve compliance. I think zero knowledge proofs will have a big part of this. And we need to maintain the opportunity for this industry to develop those innovative solutions. If we just do this, if we just say, look, we're so uncomfortable with all of this technology in its current state in 2023 that we don't even want to let you get to 2026 or 2030 or some future version of it, which is de-risked and way better than the current financial system. We're so afraid of this that we're just going to get rid of it today. That is a huge loss for the United States of America, because guess what? This is going to get built somewhere, and we should want it to be built here.
Has there been a response in the European Union, in other jurisdictions, similar to this? Given
No,
the with the war, you know what I mean, like terrorist financing and all this stuff, or is
no,
it really just kind of contained to the U.S.?
no. But what gets missed a lot is the EU is equally, if not more, obsessed with anti-money laundering as we are in the US, and already have operative regulations in place, some of which have really unfortunate monetary thresholds, and where they are really looking to crack down on self-hosted wallets.
Yeah.
And so there's something called the AMLR. There's something called the transfer of funds regulation. But while everybody's sort of celebrating MiCA just as a step forward and a positive step, obviously there are problems with it, but still they got some legislation through. The anti-money laundering, like the attendant anti-money laundering regulation, is going to make it hard for crypto too. I actually think the places where, as Jake said, it's being built and being built in a really responsible way is Singapore, some in Japan. Like we're seeing a lot, South Korea. There's a lot and very vibrant crypto community over there.
Mhm.
So it is. I agree with Jake. It's going to keep getting built. I actually think for a while it'll keep getting built in the U.S. until it just becomes truly untenable. And I mean,
Mm.
maybe we're getting close to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
We do have one advantage in the US, which I always come back to, which is we have the courts.
I knew
And
it.
so, we can talk about sort of what's the short term,
That's so
how do we
true.
respond? How do we respond to the rule? Always for me, and this is, I think, the position that both the Blockchain Association and the DeFi Education Fund have in writing these comment letters. There's two things we're trying to do. One is we're trying to explain from a policy perspective why we think that this proposal is not right or could be better or shouldn't go forward at all. The second thing that we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for litigation, understanding that there may be a bad outcome and that we will bring the case to court where a judge may see things differently than an elected official or a regulator who is just a hammer seeing nails. And Rebecca and I have the extraordinary privilege of working with Amanda Tuminelli, who's the chief legal officer at DEF. She's a litigator. She and we will be looking at this to figure out, if worst comes to worst and this gets adopted in this way, how do we raise the right issues in the comment process so that we can take those issues to court? And I think that's something that, at least in my experience, in other jurisdictions is a lot harder. We do get to challenge the government here, and we often win, right? We are developing a track record of winning these types of cases. So in the long term, I think that's where a lot of this stuff ends up. We have privacy rights that are guaranteed to us under the US Constitution. The Fourth Amendment is one of my favorite amendments, if not my favorite. And I think that's where we're going to vindicate our interests long term.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the courts, since we did our last update, I mean, with Ripple, of course, they threw out certain parts of it, the against like the executives, but they did that for a specific reason. But with with other stuff, with the ETF approval, with Coinbase, and I mean, the courts have really stood up. And I think if you don't have faith in the courts, then we have a bigger problem on our hands. And I think that's what makes the U.S. so special, which is there is a very strong judicial system. And as long as that continues to be the case, and I think you can make really strong arguments in the right to privacy and other components that this bill and others are stepping on very clearly. And um, anything else on this particular bill? And I want to transition to the last kind of 10 minutes talking about other regulatory stuff, what you're seeing in the horizon and just other topics. But as it relates to this particular bill, is it anything else that is noteworthy to talk about?
I mean, as Jake said, like we need to come up with, and sort of I tried to allude to it when we started, we need to come up with really viable solutions that are compelling. We've talked a lot about, hey, just regulate the on and off ramps. Not Yeah, but that doesn't really carry the day. People want options. So reach out to BA, reach out to the DeFi Education Fund. Policy is not limited to those people who have it in their title or who are associated with doing it. I think we want to see this be a larger industry push. So if you have legitimate business use cases for mixing, please reach out to somebody who does policy to share it. And if you have really strong ideas for AML, and look, zero knowledge proofs, digital ID, lots of things are swirling around, but share your ideas so that those people who do interface with policymakers regularly can really work on those too.
Yeah. And anyone that has experience, I mean, I think the internet went through this too with encryption. Like Bill Gates and others were really pushing the encryption battle back in the day. And that was not too long ago. I mean, it's just so funny how these things come up with new pieces of technology. And now, encryption is so essential for the internet. But lo and behold, we're at it again. All right. Well, moving on this topic. What else should we talk about, guys? What else is on your mind? What are you most focused on or paying attention to?
Yeah, so I'll throw in one other item that we're all working on right now, which is another piece of rulemaking, also from the Treasury Department, but a different part of the Treasury Department. This one from the IRS, which is the implementing regulation for the tax provisions that were added in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So going back in time about 2 years, folks may remember that there was a huge argument in DC over the infrastructure bill, because the infrastructure bill, of course, cost a large amount of money. And to pay for all of what the infrastructure bill provided, Congress had to find ways to raise more money. And one way they did that was by saying there is a lot of non-compliance in terms of tax payment in crypto. So we need to tighten up the tax rules to make sure that people aren't evading taxes using crypto. And the way that they did that, as a quick refresher, is, at least in part, by expanding the definition of a broker in the tax code. And this all comes back to the sort of same issue we've been talking about, which is the government wants to know who is transacting. And in this case, they want to know what people owe in terms of their taxes. And the way they do that is by deputizing intermediaries, who they call brokers, who are usually the typical Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab, right? These types of brokers who have a relationship with a customer. And so they know when the customer is buying or selling securities and knows what capital gains they may owe. And those brokers then have to file reports with the IRS and also with their customers saying what that tax obligation is. And that way the IRS knows whether people are paying their taxes or not. And of course, that does not happen in a disintermediated environment like DeFi. So what Congress did is they expanded the definition of broker in what felt at the time to us as an attempt to capture DeFi and to, again, find a responsible person to make an intermediary out of a disintermediated environment. So what they did was they changed the definition of broker to the following, quote, any person who, for consideration, is responsible for regularly providing any service effectuating transfers of digital assets on behalf of another person, end quote. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, then you and I have the same problem, because I have absolutely no idea what the hell that means. So 2 years later, the IRS finally put out a rulemaking giving a further definition of who they actually think is a broker. And unfortunately, as with so many of these other cases, the rulemaking basically says anyone who looks sideways at a DeFi protocol is now a broker and has an obligation to collect information about everybody else who's using that protocol and file it with the government. And to be more precise, what they do in the rulemaking is they create a new legal term of art, which is a facilitative service. And then what they say is any person who provides a facilitative service is someone who, with respect to a sale of digital assets, is a person who ordinarily would know or would be in a position to know the identity of the party who is making the transaction. And what they really mean by this is, for example, the decentralized exchange front end that is in a position to know who the users of that front end are, because they could just add KYC to the front end. Or maybe the governance token holders who can vote on changes to the protocol, who are in a position to know the identity of the users of the protocol, because they could just like vote on a change to the protocol that adds some type of AML KYC compliance layer to the protocol. So the rulemaking is out for comment right now. Again, the wonderful thing about our process here in the US is that the government has to ask for public comment and give notice of these things before they can put them into effect. The deadline for comments was just extended. I believe it is now November 13th. 2023. So if you're listening to this before then, we would love for you to submit comments saying things, well, saying whatever you feel about this, but specifically that you understand that this is going to infringe your privacy rights, that this is not consistent with the technology, and that Treasury should not move forward with this rulemaking in the way that they are. And we've got some resources. If you go to the DeFi Education Fund website, we also have another website. I believe it's protectdefi.org, where we've got some tools to help people submit those comments. So this is a big challenge for us, I think, an existential one for DeFi. So would love everyone to get involved in this one.
Yeah, and what Jake is talking about, the tools, is things that will help you generate letters easily using technology and sort of make the arguments that we need. As I was saying when we were talking about
Can
the
you use
notice,
like ChatGPT for this stuff or not yet?
I think people might be, but
Okay.
Yeah,
that
go
was,
to protectdefi.org and you will
We'll link in
find
there.
an interesting AI tool to help you write
Yeah,
one.
lovely. We'll link in the notes for sure.
but what I will say is, under the Administrative Procedures Act, the agency is required to take into account all the responses, and the timeline was supposed to close, I think, October 30th, so in like 6 days. And when Jake says it was extended to November 13th, it happened today, because I think as of this morning they had almost 9,000 responses,
Nice.
which is a lot. So I
That's
think
great.
they extended it so they have more, but let's make sure they have a lot, and have a lot to account for. And that's true of the NPRM from FinCEN too. Like, you have to really, it's really incumbent on us to advocate. And I don't think that only is the policy orgs either. I think it's the whole industry. If you're building, figure out a way to get involved. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily spend money and resources. We know, a lot of people are just focused on building right now, but I do think there are lots of ways to be involved. And so people should definitely be figuring that out.
Yeah. Well, in closing, I mean, I think it's really important because in times of crisis, as you said, Jake, and this is my first thinking is that's when the most overreaching pieces of legislation have been passed when the public is distracted. And I think as an industry, you guys are doing really God's work here and just keeping everyone informed and making sure that, you really are reaching out. I mean, election years are coming up. In closing, Jake, I think you said something really interesting. I think it was a while ago. I think it was a little over a year ago when we were recording a podcast over the summer. You said, "Hey, the fall tends to be a period where these agencies ratchet up their efforts and make more noise because they have to justify their budget." Election year is coming up. I don't know how often these budgets are negotiated, if it's on an annual basis or in somewhat sort of cadence. But I'm curious, just in closing, get both of your opinion on what can we expect for the remainder of the year over the next kind of 3-6 months, um, and of course, everyone right now is really, in bull mode. Bitcoin's up a ton, and so is ETH. But from the regulatory side of things, what should listeners not lose sight of, other than paying attention and commenting and reaching out to their, officials? But what are you most looking forward to over the next 3-6 months on the regulatory side of things?
I mean, I don't know about looking forward to, but I expect.
I want to keep the tone positive here.
I mean, positive.
Yeah,
Honestly,
yeah.
my positive ending before I get into what I think we're going to see is like, we're going to make it. Like, it may not look exactly like we thought, but I mean, the amount of attention this industry gets all over the world. And if you would have told me back around, 11 months ago, when we saw FTX collapse, that we'd have a viable bill come out of 2 House committees in a bipartisan manner, one of which just was with a voice vote, I'm not sure I ever would have believed it. So I think the industry is like very strong and very robust. And that's why I really want us to continue and want everyone to make efforts to really pushing this policy point forward through various different vehicles. Even if you're just a builder, like, we need you. We're here to working for you so you can keep building. So people should definitely be involved in that. I think we'll see more coming out of the Treasury Department on DeFi and on illicit finance and crypto. This week, next week. I don't think they're going to let this Hamas used crypto narrative die just with the NPRM. I think there is going to be more, and I think it's going to be tough. And we need all the tools that we can get to make sure we're moving everything forward. We may see more bills coming through. I think with some of the aid packages, there may be something tacked on from all the different AML bills that have been going through the Senate. So, I mean, my focus is on what's going to happen on the AML side with crypto and DeFi for sure.
I agree with all that. I think it's also it's amazing to note that 1 year ago today, FTX was a going concern. It feels to us like a decade ago, but it was so recent that this thing collapsed, and how far we've gone, as Rebecca was saying, how far we've come since then, I think is extraordinary. So I think it's worth recognizing, as hard as some of this stuff feels. And although, this discussion today was so much focused on an attack on the industry that we're playing defense for, there's a lot that we can be excited about and a lot to look forward to. In terms of your question, Santi, the end of the fiscal year for the agencies is at the end of September. They usually try to ram in a bunch of enforcement actions right before then. So we're thankfully past that sort of moment of heightened risk for big enforcement actions. I think I said a few months ago, after the Coinbase and Binance enforcement actions came out, and then we got that amazing order in the Ripple case, that we were so back and that we were sort of past the worst of what we were going to see, at least from the SEC and the CFTC. I'm sticking with that. I think that we are sort of past the worst of it, and now we're just sort of fighting this out. I agree entirely with Rebecca that now the main issue is with the Treasury Department and with some of these bills that we're seeing move in the Senate addressing this anti-money laundering issue. I do think in the next 3 to 6 months, the biggest opportunity that we have is a window to get legislation done that we like before all of DC is consumed with the election. Because not too far into next year, work sort of stops in Congress. And I think that the stablecoin bill, at minimum, maybe also the market structure bill, but especially the stablecoin legislation that we've been working on for so long, is baked and ready to go. And even if we just get regulatory clarity for that segment of this industry, it would be such a massive win, and it would set us up for great things going forward. So I think that's what we're going to be focused on. At this moment, it's hard to say what the likelihood of getting that done is, because there is no Speaker of the House at the time that we are recording this, and it's unclear when there will be one. And that is sort of
I thought you said they were working still.
Well, they are definitely working. They just can't actually do anything. So that's sort of the DC version of working, unfortunately.
Yeah, I love that kind of work. But where do I sign up?
Yeah, but hopefully we'll get that logjam freed up soon, and we'll be able to make some progress there. So that's my outlook.
That's awesome, guys. Well, I know you both are lawyers, so keeping it positive is encouraging. And you saying that we're so back, Rebecca, I don't know if you would agree with that. Are we back?
I'm just like, we're gonna make it.
We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it, and we're so back.
I'm really sure of it. Like, it might not look exactly like what we thought. There were definitely some interesting twists and turns that I'm not sure any of us could have anticipated, especially when Jake and I started working together, like in what feels like a million years ago. Was FTX even like a thing? Like, was it even established back when we started working together? Yeah, like 2018. Like, no. But I do think we're gonna make it. It just may look different than we thought. But this industry it's strong, and yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for the fantastic work that you both do. We'll link to all these initiatives and ways where people can get involved in the show notes. And I guess for the next episode, we'll have to have you on. Let's talk about like recent wins and make sure that people are reminded of, because you guys have made a ton of progress. And I do want to go deeper there. I think we're so conditioned to think about the negatives, but there've been some huge wins. And it's important that we remain focused on the offensive. So both, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Rebecca, I know we got to go. And so anyways, thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back in a few weeks.
Awesome. Thanks.